Tonight on the Daily Debrief, the man whose murder trial ended with this reaction is speaking out tonight to the Law&Crime Network.
I wanted to prove my innocence and that I am innocent.
Plus, the trial of a South Carolina woman accused of kidnapping her husband's mistress. Also, 2 Detroit cops are on the other side of the law, facing criminal charges. And the First Lady joins the debate about the legal ramifications of the Me Too movement. That's tonight on the Daily Debrief. And good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Daily Debrief. I'm Aaron Keller. It was an incredible verdict. An El Paso, Texas man stood up and learned his fate after facing his 3rd murder trial on murder charges. Tonight, he's speaking out about his experiences to the Law&Crime Network. Here's the moment he waited years to hear.
In the District Court of El Paso County, Texas, 409th Judicial District, the State of Texas versus Daniel Villegas, number 94-0D09328. Verdict Form B. We, the jury, find the defendant Daniel Villegas not guilty of...
And of course, it was unanimous. Today, that man, Daniel Villegas, spoke exclusively to Law&Crime's Vincent Hill about his 3 trials. The first resulted in a hung jury. The second resulted in a successful appeal. The third was the acquittal that you just saw. Villegas described what was going through his mind the moment he learned his fate.
What was going through my mind was, I was wondering, if I made the right choice on behalf of my kids on not taking the Alfred plea. I knew, I was confident, that, I wanted to prove my innocence and that I am innocent. And my wife was with me and, she helped me make the decision. So, I had her on my side, but I was wondering to myself, did we make the right choice for our children? Because...
For Daniel Villegas, right there, described the appeals process, which resulted in a new trial and ultimately the acquittal.
Well, I'm sure I had a lot of doubts. And when the family first came and approached me about the case, and I found out it was about a 16-year-old young man that had been in prison at that time about 14 years, and he had been convicted up to the 2nd trial, and he had confessed on it. And they asked me, what can you do? And I said, it's going to be very difficult. So as I started looking through the case, and they brought me the transcripts of the 1st trial, the 2nd trial, the investigative reports, it was very clear to me that Daniel was innocent. And so when I communicated to the family, I told them, Daniel's innocent. And they said, great, you're going to get him out? And I said, no, not quite. It's not going to be that simple. We still had to go through the hard process of a writ habeas corpus, presenting all the evidence to the judge, have him make finding of fact, conclusion of law, and a recommendation on Daniel receiving a new trial, goes up to the Court of Criminal Appeals in Texas, which is, I believe, one of the most conservative courts in the country, and have them make a decision on sending it back.
All right, here to help us break down this case is attorney Andel Brown, who joins us from time to time. So, Andel, this is the first time you and I have had a chance to talk about this case. What's your reaction?
I mean, it was powerful, Aaron, watching just the visceral reaction of Daniel and his supporters as that verdict was being read. I can think of all the things he's been.
Andel, I hope we can get you back there. The audio was cutting out a little bit. Let me try to maybe throw one more question your way. We were focused so much on the reaction here, but what we heard from the attorney and from the defendant himself there sounds a lot like what happens in an average case like this. The attorney doing his best to try to advocate and advise a client, and a client nervous about whether he took the correct tactical decision. That's very common.
Absolutely. In trial, there are no guarantees. Your attorney does the best job that they can. They present the evidence and they fight for you, but they don't know the outcome. Here, they took the risk knowing that he was innocent. He went for it and they got the desired result.
Now, the defense attorney said the evidence should have led police to the true killer here, and the way he said it seems to suggest that the defense seems to have a sense of who the true killer is. So there's a sad reality here that Villegas, according to his attorney, wasn't the right guy, but that somebody else out there is walking the streets having committed this crime.
Yeah, and that's a tough thing. What we want from law enforcement is to find truth, is to go out and investigate cases. When shortcuts are taken, when you stick to one person and refuse to look at anyone else after you decide this is the person you're going to prosecute, it hurts the community, and I think that's what his lawyers were getting.
Great analysis. Andel Brown, I know we'll join you again in a couple of minutes, though. We're going to turn now to South Carolina, where prosecutors are trying to convince a jury that a woman and her husband kidnapped a younger woman with whom the husband was said to have been having an affair. Tammy Moorer is on trial for conspiracy to kidnap 20-year-old Heather Elvis. Moorer's husband was already separately charged and convicted. The prosecutor admitted he or she had no clue where Elvis might be. In court, though, today, prosecutors used cell phone records to track the victim's movements. They also pointed to a suspicious call from a payphone to the victim.
I can't see with clarity with the detail on this. One of the records is in front of a Baptist church, and then the next one is probably about 200, maybe 300 yards down the road on the same area, on the same street. I'm sorry.
Okay.
So they're both in that area of Forestburg.
Okay. And then next, where's the next location?
At 335-12 and 337-32, there are two records on Peachtree Road, two location records.
Also today, prosecutors called a neighbor to the stand. That neighbor's surveillance system apparently caught the defendants moving to a critical scene.
Why did you contact law enforcement?
I contacted Horry County because a friend had sent me a story about Heather Elvis's case.
What do you mean sent you a story in the mail?
On Facebook.
Okay.
On social media. And within reading this story, I found out that a person of interest lived on 814. I Googled the address with it, realized it was down below where I live. And I do know from the story her car was found at Peachtree Landing. Someone may have come by the house to get to the landing, because to get from the other end of 814 to the landing, if you don't take the main road, you're going to go by my house. My cameras may have picked up something. I wanted to turn it over. It might not have anything on it. It might have something on it. But my good conscience would not be clear if I didn't turn over what I may have possibly had.
Back for more analysis here on the Law&Crime Network is attorney Andel Brown. So listen, Andel, the prosecution thinks that neighbor's camera system picked up the defendants heading to one of the crime scenes here. The defense disputes that. I got to wonder, how relevant is this? You got a back road, it's late, smaller community, not many cars on the road, but ultimately, does it really show the defendant's vehicle here?
Well, obviously, that's a question at hand, Aaron. But I think it will establish a key fact that the prosecution is trying to prove, that they had the opportunity and they were within the time frame of when this time was committed, also that they were in the location where this crime was committed.
You know, the victim had been on a date, apparently, the evening before she disappeared. Then there were these series of strange phone calls. Who made them? Then she disappears. The prosecution is saying, look, it's this defendant and her husband. That's the link that they're trying to make. But is there room for reasonable doubt here?
I think there definitely is room for reasonable doubt, Aaron, especially when we're talking about calls from a payphone. They can only tell one side of the interactions. I think there's a lot of reasonable doubt in this case. They don't know where she is. They can't say what happened to her. They can only speculate. And I think that's a great recipe for reasonable doubt.
Yeah, you know, we saw some objections we normally don't see in cases like this, sort of really cutting into the defense's ability to raise alternate suspects. A lot of times judges will give defense attorneys a pretty wide berth to make sure that they're not infringing on a constitutional right to present a defense. But here we're seeing pretty strict limits on what the defense can call out. Do you have a problem with that?
Well, as a defense attorney, I always want as wide latitude as I can have to defend my client, who is often looking at losing their freedom or, even their life if it's a capital case. So we want to be able to fight. Who wants to fight with one hand tied behind their back? I'm on the defense side on this one.
Look, Andel, we'll certainly talk about this again. Let's move along, though. We're following two other trials this week. A Michigan man is on trial after admitting to murdering a neighbor who was clearing snow from a disputed driveway. Defendant Wendell Popejoy shot neighbor Sheila Bonge as part of an easement dispute. Popejoy faces so-called open murder charges. Prosecutors have played interrogation recordings of the police confronting Popejoy with evidence of the victim's dead body behind his house. New York City prosecutors have dropped one sexual misconduct charge against movie producer Harvey Weinstein. New evidence suggests that one of the complaints against Weinstein may have stemmed from a consensual situation. That complaint came from actress Lucia Evans. Weinstein's attorneys are now accusing her of committing perjury before a grand jury. 5 other counts against Weinstein remain. Still ahead tonight on the Daily Debrief, President Trump's feud with Attorney General Jeff Sessions escalates with reported talks about a possible successor. Plus, 2 Detroit police officers are on the other side of the law. We'll break down the charges they face for the way that they tried to seek out a suspect. That story and more when the Daily Debrief continues in just a moment. And welcome back, everybody. Now let's take a quick look at criminal cases making headlines across the country. Here is Anthony Velez.
Here are today's top crime stories trending on Law&Crime.com and across the country. An aspiring model in Georgia was pronounced brain dead after being shot in the neck and causing a 3-car accident while driving in Clayton County. 28-year-old Kelsey Quayle reportedly lost control of her car and drove into oncoming traffic after being shot in the neck by an unknown suspect. Quayle had recently moved to the Atlanta area to pursue modeling opportunities. The other drivers in the crash only suffered minor injuries. Authorities are now looking through surveillance footage for more clues. An argument over salt and vinegar chips between 2 teen cousins ended with one of the teens being shot and the other facing criminal charges in South Carolina. 19-year-old Ryan Dean Langdale initially reported the shooting of his 17-year-old cousin as an accident, but authorities say forensic evidence contradicted his claims. Langdale now faces charges of attempted murder, using a firearm in a violent crime, and obstructing justice. A death row inmate in Tennessee who asked a federal appeals court to force the state to use an electric chair instead of lethal injection for his execution will have to wait to meet his maker after the court temporarily halted the execution. Edmund Zagorski was sentenced to death in 1984 after he was convicted for the 1983 murders of John Dotson and Jimmy Porter in Robertson County. The federal appeals court will now consider the change of execution method as well as the argument that Zagorski received poor legal representation at his trial. Those were today's top crime stories. I'm Anthony Velez for the Daily Debrief.
A candidate running unopposed for a judge's seat in Michigan is accused of suggesting special treatment during a drunk driving arrest. Police in Royal Oak near Detroit pulled Julie McDonald over for throwing a cigarette out of her window, failing to signal a turn, and speeding. She said she hadn't had anything to drink since the night before, but police say a breathalyzer indicated a blood alcohol level of 0.10. That's above the legal limit, of course, of 0.08. After she was in the squad car, she told officers she was, quote, running for an office. She then said, and we're paraphrasing here, that her arrest would cause trouble. McDonald was running for a seat on the Oakland County, Michigan Circuit Court. An internet page discussing her campaign appears to have disappeared. 2 Detroit police officers are on the other side of the law after a random review of body camera footage led to criminal charges. The 2 officers were arraigned and suspended without pay, or with pay rather, after a supervisor caught them busting into a house without a search warrant and arresting a man inside. The occupant said he told the officers they had no right to be there. The police were apparently looking for someone else who wasn't even at the property. The criminal charges against the officers stem from a new policy which requires supervisors to check the body camera recordings of officers on the streets. If convicted of all the charges, these 2 cops could each spend 15 years behind bars. Andel Brown is with us here on the Law and Crime Network. Andel, you're the exact person I want to ask about this story. Criminal charges for police officers banging down a door looking for someone who isn't even there. What do you think?
Well, I think law enforcement means that they're supposed to uphold the law, not be above it. And the law says that if you're searching for someone, you believe they're there, you need to have a warrant to enter someone's property. They didn't have it. They thought that person was there and they just wanted to enter anyway. That's the allegation, and those are the charges that are coming against them. I think the body camera policy is a good one because transparency and accountability, it helps the officers and it helps the community.
Yeah, this is a great case to talk about. Look, it contains so many issues to talk about. Andel Brown, I know we'll catch up again in a couple of minutes here. The other side of police work is also on display here tonight thanks to security camera footage in Clackamas County, Oregon. A group of sheriff's deputies there are credited for helping save a 1-week-old baby using CPR. Video recordings show the baby's parents walking through a shopping center when they noticed their newborn not breathing. So they called for help, and deputies rushed in a couple of minutes later. The baby is named Audrey Harmon, and her parents huddled nearby hugging one another as emergency crews worked frantically to save their little girl. At last report, baby Audrey remains in intensive care, but she's steadily improving. Her parents asked the deputies to stop by the hospital for a series of photos. They hope to show these pictures to their child someday to remind her of the people who saved her life. Somebody else might need emergency medical treatment if some Twitter trash talk actually leads to a televised tangle. Hotshot attorney Michael Avenatti has challenged Donald Trump Jr. to an actual physical fight. Avenatti called this week for an MMA-style rumble going a full 3 rounds. That's if the proceeds went to charity. Avenatti said his cut of the profits would go to rebuild hurricane-ravaged Puerto Rico and toward the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. It does not appear Trump Jr. has responded. Speaking of the Trump administration, reports surfaced last night that the president considered replacing the top law enforcement man in the land with his own chief of staff. Jeff Sessions has been the butt of Trump criticism for some time. The Washington Post is reporting that the president talked to Sessions' chief of staff, Matthew Whitaker, about taking over as AG, but the details and the reason why are unknown. The former deputy director of Donald Trump's presidential campaign has a new legal battle tonight. This time, it is with his attorneys. The law firm, which helped Gates cut a deal, Rick Gates that is, cut a deal with special counsel Robert Mueller, is now suing Gates for unpaid legal bills. The firm says Gates owes more than $368,000. Gates pleaded guilty to providing a false statement and agreed to cooperate with the government. In return, Mueller's prosecutors dropped a list of more serious charges. First Lady Melania Trump is saying women shouldn't accuse men of sexual misconduct without, quote, really hard evidence. The problem is that her statement misstates the law in most states. Mrs. Trump made the comments during an interview with ABC News while on her recent trip to Africa. She says Americans should support both accusers and the accused in the so-called Me Too movement. Andel Brown has been along with us this half hour on the Law and Crime Network. Andel, I just want to jump in and ask a couple of last thoughts about the statements that the First Lady made here. What do you think of her jumping on the bandwagon of corroboration here? Now, in most states, that's not the law, and in the few states that require it, it's corroboration only for certain types of offenses. What do you make of this?
Well, I think, Aaron, as you very well know, that testimony is evidence. If the testimony is reliable and the witness is found to be credible, then that is, as Melania Trump would put it, hard evidence. And I think that in this age of where a lot of these things happen, where it may just be one other person there, that we should empower people to come up and speak out, even if they are the only person that was there to witness what happened to them. I don't think we should require corroboration, and I don't think it's necessary. We can evaluate whether that person's testimony and their account is credible all by itself.
Yeah, look, Andel, I researched a report for lawandcrime.com not too long ago because the First Lady's not the first person to sort of misstate the legal standard here or suggest maybe that it should change. The bottom line is many states used to require corroboration. New York was one of them, and back when New York required corroboration, there were very few sexual assault or rape prosecutions. Well, when the corroboration requirement was removed, the prosecution rate skyrocketed, and so did the conviction rate. Because the bottom line is, by the time many victims come forward, there really isn't any more corroborating evidence. And that's why many states change the law. So I guess from a policy perspective, yes, certainly a legislature could change the law to state whatever the legislature wishes. But are we sensing a push here by conservatives to dial the law back chronologically to the days where states would say, hey, look, you can't go after this unless you have some other piece of evidence other than the victim's word?
Yeah, we just saw the Kavanaugh hearings, Aaron, and we heard a lot of people saying, well, where's the evidence? Where's the evidence? Well, there's no evidence. There is evidence. The evidence is what is being put forth, what's being testified to by the alleged victim in the case. Now, whether or not you believe that evidence, whether or not you think it's credible, is a whole different story. But that person's account, that person's experience, it's evidence, it's real to them. A court should take it seriously, and if we want justice, we have to allow victims to speak, we have to encourage them to speak, and we have to take them seriously.
Yeah, exactly. And also, look, I mean, the bottom line is the law is always in flux. The legislature can change it. The courts interpret it up against the Constitution. But the bottom line is the modern standard is that in many courtrooms in many states of this country, a victim can get up on the stand and tell his or her story. And if jurors believe that story, that is enough evidence for a conviction on these charges. Andel Braun, we always appreciate it when you join us with your insight here on the Law and Crime Network. Let's do this again sometime soon.
Thanks, Aaron.
That's going to be it for today here on the Daily Debrief. A reminder, of course, that the Law and Crime Network provides live coverage of trials across the country beginning at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. We hope you will join us back here tomorrow morning. And, of course, the Daily Debrief, Monday through Friday from 5 until 5:30. We will see you back here tomorrow as we hope. For now, this is Aaron Keller, and for everyone here at the Law and Crime Network, have a very good evening.